Hello, this is Ellen Teeter. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida State Oriental Medical Association. And today, Demita Hartz, a registered therapist or licensed counselor and licensed acupuncturist, is going to be joining us today. And we're going to give you some good things to think about in terms of self-care. We want to give you some 5 strategies for protecting yourself. These are also good for you to share with your patient when they're in stressful jobs and situations. So we're going to let Demita start her screen share, and we will start sharing the information.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate that. So like Ellen said, I am a licensed adult counselor and a licensed acupuncture physician. And what we're going to be covering today, as many of you know, we're going to be covering wellness in the workplace. So 5 strategies for protecting yourself. And we're also going to talk about ways to prevent burnout. Sorry, go back to my earlier screen.
Friends would walk up to me.
Sorry, user error.
Okay. You want me to start it? I can start it if you want.
Oh, no, I think I'm
Okay.
good.
I was anxious. It became really obvious to me that my coffee addiction was...
Wow, it's determined to play. Bless its heart. Okay. We gotta love our technological overlords. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's see if the overlords will be kind.
Okay. Well, welcome. We have some people here. If you all want to, while we're setting up the PowerPoint, put in where you're from, where you're viewing from. We've got people from all over the state, it looks like. The chat box, you'll see down in the control section, it's a little balloon. And if you all can put in where you're from and just say hi. I want to welcome everybody to our seminar. Okay, if you have a question, you can go to the Q&A box down on it's a double bubble, and put questions in, and we'll monitor them during the seminar and try to jump in. So welcome. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome everyone. And I'm seeing some names pop up. I'm so glad to have all of you here. And I think that we're all set for Sydney God to have smiled at us after all, instead of smited us. So we'll start with our slide. So it's to give a brief overview, and we're going to be covering burnout prevention, setting boundaries, developing a healthy work-life balance, self-care as patient care, and the pause that refreshes. So I love this quote. And for burnout prevention, burnout exists because we've made rest a reward rather than a right. One of the things I love to talk with my clients about, that resting is a verb. And rest as a verb is an action that we're taking. We are actively resting. We are actively allowing our bodies to heal and recharge. And that's important to recognize, because for a lot of people, resting is considered to be lazy. You're not doing enough. You're not doing more than you should be. And if we don't allow ourselves to rest, we don't allow our bodies to recharge. We don't allow our spirit or our mind to recharge, and it can be very detrimental. It's like trying to drive a car with no gas. You're not going to get pretty far, and you might actually wreck the engine after a while. So the analogy that I'd like to use is our energy accounts. So imagine that your energy is stored in a bank. You can only deposit a certain amount of energy each day, And you have to use, like you can use what you have in that bank for yourself or for other people, but you can also cause a deficit in your bank by withdrawing too much for yourself, for other people, or for activities. So being the very wise business person that you are, you set up 3 accounts in the bank. And you name these accounts physical energy, emotional energy, and spiritual energy. But the bank has a special rule. If you're a deficit in one account, you may run into a deficit in other accounts. And a deficit in your bank account requires you to make an intentional effort to resolve this deficit, or your accounts will all be frozen, and you can't use these accounts until you resolve that deficit. That's a mean banker, isn't he? So your physical energy account, that would be where you make energy deposits there by, taking care of your body, resting, exercise, and nutrition. For your emotional energy account, you make deposits there by maintaining healthy relationships with the people you love, like your friends, your immediate family, your partner. And in order to recharge there, it's really essential that you do that in order to be available for your patients, for your staff, family, friends, for anybody. Your spiritual energy, you make the deposits there by connecting with your sense of purpose or your higher power, by meditating. And this is really important because when you're interacting with your patients, it's where you say to yourself, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I have become a doctor. This is why I'm an acupuncturist. This is why I'm a healer. So when there's a deficit in that, it's like, why the hell am I here today? So burnout occurs in a number of ways, but it occurs when we deplete our energy accounts, our physical energy, our emotional energy, our spiritual energy. And it can happen to anybody in any field at any given time. So originally it was coined by an American psychologist, and I'm going to butcher his name. So Dr. Herbert Fredenberger. And if I didn't butcher it, hey, good for me. So burnout was originated in the field of medicine, that term. And it's used to describe symptoms related to severe stress and high expectations that are present in the field of medicine. So when burnout happens, we experience it physically, we experience it emotionally, we experience it mentally. All of our accounts are frozen, essentially. And what happens is when we're burned out from either being permanently overworked or under challenge, it can cause us to not be available for our relationships, not be available for ourselves, not be available for our clients. Burnout happens in usually in 1 or 2 years after being in private practice. In some fields, it happens after 5 years. Usually, it becomes evident before we quit that we are burnt out. So when we're going into this, we kind of make the assumption that we are spared from burnout, and we're not. And we often go into the field feeling that we have this expectation that we're supposed to, as healers, as acupuncturists, be able to change and control a patient's illness and actions. We are, as humans, just in general, can only control what's in our control. And maybe we're working on with our patient to help tonify their spleen chi, but they keep doing stuff to damage the spleen chi. I have one client, I keep working on him to help with a lot of the pain that he has for his musculoskeletal issue. But every week he comes back because he re-injures himself. And it's kind of like rolling that boulder up the hill. It feels like it keeps rolling back down. But when we're not able to adjust to the realization that we can only control that what we can control, sometimes that can lead to burnout too, because then we feel in a way that we haven't done enough and we start blaming ourselves, which can be very damaging. So for exhaustion, so what does burnout look like? So burnout can look like in three main areas. There's different ways it can look, but these are the three main areas to keep in mind. So it can be for your physical exhaustion or emotional exhaustion. You can feel emotionally exhausted, unable to cope, tired, down, and you don't have enough energy. So it can look like stomach pains. It can look like gastrointestinal issues, bowel issues. You have worked yourself to the point where your body doesn't want to digest. It's not one of the things that it feels the need to do. Because right now it feels like, with the amount of stress that you're under, like a saber-tooth tiger is chasing you. And the last thing your body's going to want to do is digest. It's going to want to activate that fight or flight response. It can also like be personalization. So people who are burnt out usually find that their jobs are becoming increasingly stressful and frustrating. They might become cynical about their working conditions and their colleagues. And at the same time, they might try to distance themselves emotionally and feel kind of numb about their work and about the patients that they're working with. Reduction of performance. That's what we usually typically think about burnout, because usually people producing that work about burnout are employers. So they're looking at how it affects their revenue. But burnout doesn't just happen at work, it happens at home or when caring for other family members. There's a burnout that happens specifically with caregivers, because it's hard to be a caregiver 24/7 for someone that you love, and not having that separation from a situation that is exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally. So people with burnout can often feel very negative about their tasks, find it very hard to concentrate. They can feel listless, and they can also have difficulty being creative with new solutions as to how to address certain things, or even feeling creative of wanting to make things. Does that make sense? By the way, if anyone has any questions, please stop me, because if not, I am going to steamroll through everything. So if you have a hand up, go for it. So in our profession, there's a number of reasons why we're going to experience burnout or may experience burnout. We're called to care for people who are sick, who are scared, who are hurt and dying, and their families. So our work can leave us very drained, even on the best days. One of the clients that I've worked with in the past, it was in my field of mental health counseling. I was called to go to hospitals and help comfort families. And there was this one couple that will always stay with me in my heart. And what was so significant about that was one of the wife in the couple, she was very sick. She had an accident and she was in and out of the hospital. And her husband, who had been married to her for over 50 years, was very distraught and would try and keep very optimistic. And even though she was continuing getting sicker and sicker because of her age and because of the accident, I would try my best to be supportive and to give them that comfort. And as much as I really loved being in the room with them and supporting them, I loved oftentimes leaving that room feeling very burnt out because of having to expend the emotional energy of being present with them in that moment. And I know a lot of you have had a very similar experience, like where you have your client who they're getting treatment and you're providing that support and that resource for them to have that comfort. And sometimes we leave feeling kind of drained after that session or after that treatment time. So the specific job that we do can lead to different stressors related to burnout, such as administrative duties. A lot of us work for ourselves. That can be exhausting as we're trying to make the phone calls, following up with the billing, do our own marketing, the patient care. If you take insurance, dealing with insurance, you have coworkers, employees, networking. It's a lot. And some of that work isn't exactly covered by our pay. Like marketing for many of us isn't exactly covered. We're hoping to see a benefit from that, but the immediate cost isn't there. So that can be kind of very stressful to deal with. Our own work-life balance. I love this little guy right there as he's trying to balance all those plates. Because sometimes it feels like that. We're juggling many plates. And sometimes our poor work-life balance can make it more difficult to juggle. Sometimes it's helpful to set up that boundary. If you have your personal number and then you have your work number, either through Google phone or what have you. And what that allows you to do is also to, at a certain time of the night, you turn it off. It turns off for you. That way, whatever emergency calls, you can leave it. There's an emergency number or alert emergency details, like to contact their local emergency number after hours, and to return back to that number after you've gotten to work, so that you're not taking work home with you, and vice versa, you're not taking home to work with you. Setting poor boundaries at work or outside of work. And as clinicians, even though we are in the healing profession, we are not required to be present in that way 24/7. And by not having that, that can be kind of difficult, because then when are you ever off? Another, different stressor to your work-life balance would be stressors outside of work. Because life doesn't stop when you're at work. Just like life did not stop when we were in school. Even though, it'd be nice if you could pause life for a little bit until you're done with those years in school, and then you get back to it. It's like, yay, everything is, I can handle this now, instead of the boards, instead of all the classes. Another cause of burnout would be the conditioning of our own education or own profession, sorry. It's a long day. The conditioning of our own education. The patient comes first. That's one of the things we tell ourselves, or we're taught. Never show weakness. Never show that you have an issue. We're encouraged to be that workaholic, always on the go. Got to get those numbers. Got to get all those client numbers, or we can't graduate, or you're not going to make it through that semester. The perfectionist. Everything, you have to get the best grade. You have to do your very best. There can't be no errors. Or the lone ranger, when we're by ourselves in the field. And working in private practice can feel very lonely, especially if you're by yourself, you're the only professional there. Because it's very difficult not having someone to confer to or confer with, and having that community, which is one really nice thing about Fulfillment. We try to build that community so that you never feel like you have to go it alone, but it can be also really hard when there's not that, even locally, that connection. So building that connection is a way of helping with kind of like, I like to call it Lone Ranger syndrome, so that you don't go through alone. So another part of that is also the administration of the financial burden. It's not cheap starting a business. I mean, I wish I could see all of you. I really can't. I do apologize. But it's, I mean, I'm sure we can all raise a hand that it was not cheap starting our own businesses. And the managing of the business, it has a cost both financially as well as physically, emotionally. It costs to all of our different accounts. So that does take a toll with us as well. As much as we may love it, it also does come at a cost. And maybe unhealthy work environments. I've worked in places where I call it the good or bad and the downright goofy sometimes, because sometimes the work environments aren't the healthiest. And then there is the financial burden of, like I said, managing private practice and acupuncture, making sure that we are keeping up with our licensure, with our CEUs. It can have a financial burden. And while these things are important, that can also be a stressor. Trying to share, there we go. So coming back to the piece of setting boundaries. This is becoming quickly a favorite quote of mine. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Not exactly sure who the original source was, but it's really helpful to remember that we are not required to burn ourselves out in order to help other people or put ourselves in situations that are not the best for us in order to provide for somebody else. So different ways of setting boundaries, which are important. So boundaries can look very differently. So we have 6 main types of boundaries. So there are physical boundaries, are touching the personal space. Intellectual boundaries are thoughts and ideas. Emotional boundaries, a person's emotions. Sexual boundaries, it could be physical, emotional, intellectual, parts of sexuality. The material boundaries are money and possessions. Our time boundaries is how a person uses their time. I like to always remind the clinicians that I work with that their time is valuable, and that they are allowed to set limits to the time that they spend doing certain things. Because even though those things may be helpful, everything comes at a cost. And that's important to note. If there's one takeaway that we have, is recognizing that it comes at a cost, and if you have it to give freely, then it is also good to be wise about what you are giving. So boundaries can vary in different relationships, cultures, settings. For some relationships, it's going to look very different. Like the boundaries that you set with your parents can look very different than the boundaries that you set with your partner, or the boundaries that you set with your friends may look very different than you set with associates. And sometimes in friendships, friends can become families. The boundaries there change too. For different cultures, for some cultures, a boundary, it is considered very rude to, if you're in a public place, to have your headphones on so that it can be heard. Whereas for other places, it's considered very rude to be around a family member of an opposite sex who is not your direct parent, because of the cultural boundaries that are there outside of, being around them as family. So boundaries are usually classified in 3 ways, like rigid, porous, and healthy. So the healthy boundaries is when your boundaries are respected, and you also respect your opinions are respected, and you respect the opinions of other people. You don't compromise your core values. You allow yourself to negotiate healthy, effective solutions for interpersonal issues. You share information in an appropriate way. Like you're not oversharing or undersharing. You're not talking about that, fun new position you and your partner tried last night with your patients. That would be to overshare. But you're also not undersharing important information that they need to know. You allow yourself to say no, and you also allow yourself to accept no from other people. And no is kind of a complete sentence. You don't really need to follow up after a no sometimes. You also recognize and you communicate personal wants and your needs. A porous boundary, and I was kind of hoping for kind of like a more jagged fence, because that's more of what I think of as porous boundaries. The picket fence with a lot more holes. So you overshare personal information. You might find yourself telling a lot more details of your life that maybe the patient doesn't need to know at that time. They're coming to you for maybe lower back pain, and you tell them about some of the exploits that you got to when you were a teenager. Maybe not that important in that moment. So having difficulty to say no, that would be a porous boundary. So if someone asks you to do something and you say yes automatically without considering the cost, that could possibly suggest a boundary issue. You get too over-involved with other people's problems to the point where it's causing a deficit in yourself. You're very dependent on what other people think of you. So some level of codependency. You accept the abuse and disrespect maybe because on some level you believe you deserve it, or that it's not acceptable to set those boundaries. And you fear rejection if you don't comply with other people. That would be an issue with forced boundaries. With rigid boundaries, it's kind of more like being in that, let's go back. Like being in a prison in a sense, like the prison walls. It's a bank, but we don't really have like prisons in clip art for me. So that's why it's now a bank. But it's like the prison walls. It's hard, it's rigid, there's some barbed wire across, no one's getting in, but you're not getting out either. So you're avoiding the intimacy and closeness in relationships. You're not likely to ask for help, can show weakness, not allowing yourself to have more than a few close relationships, very protective, with personal information, it's locked down, can't let anybody in, very detached from relationships, and keeping others at an emotional distance in order to avoid rejection. So still that fear of rejection, but you're pushing people away. And that's not healthy either, because as humans, we have to make those connections with each other. And like I said, you might have different boundaries for different relationships. Your relationships professionally may be a lot more rigid than your relationship with your personal connections. And your relationships with your family might be a lot more porous than it might be with a friend. But kind of finding the healthy boundary within all of that, or the healthy balance, is kind of the goal of creating healthy relationships and healthy boundaries. So as medical professionals, we are duty bound. We are also bound by our own selves for our own safety to create those healthy professional boundaries. It protects our clients, it protects us from burning out, it protects us from professionally. It keeps us from crossing that boundary with our patients and with ourselves. For example, creating a reasonable limit to patient contact, recognizing that your patients are responsible for their own care. There's only so much that you can do if the person's coming to you to get treated for their addiction to cigarettes, but they keep buying packs of cigarettes, that's them making a choice. And it's okay to recognize that this is there to address that with them in a very therapeutic manner. Like, I know you came to me for this, but you're going completely against your goals right now. Reducing things or activities that don't support you, listening to your own needs, and allowing yourself to have a healthy work-life balance. So developing a healthy work-life balance. So another really nice quote, we need to do a better job of putting ourselves higher on our to-do list. We definitely deserve to be right there on the top of that stack. Because it's another really lovely metaphor is when you're in the airplane and they're doing the air safety, they always tell you when you are, if there's anything that happens to the plane that gets depressurized, you always what? You always put the mask on yourself first before you help somebody else. You always have to take that breath for yourself. Because if you're not putting yourself on your to-do list, I guarantee you no one else is going to put you on your own to-do list. So it's very important that we have that. And finding that balance can look very differently for different people. And I love this image because they're both finding that balance in their life. And it might look, you might not get your foot all the way out like that. It might be here. But is there balance? Yes. And there is harmony in that room. So there's some really helpful strategies for creating that work-life balance or improving on it. Communicating with others, your own needs, with your family, talking with other professionals in the field to create that network for yourself. Knowing your limits and recognizing that you have limits does not make you a bad practitioner at all, or that you don't care about your clients. You do. And seeing those limits connects you to your humanity and allows yourself to have that grace within yourself and with others as well. There's a saying, you can only do what you can do and no more. So prioritizing your own responsibilities, like sleep, healthy diet, exercise, rest, and other forms of self-care are very important as you are providing care not only to others, but to yourself. Focus on tasks that have the most immediacy. What's the most important needs to be done or can be done very quickly first. There is, it's called the snowball effect of trying to, when there's a money saving technique, you're paying off debts, you're paying off the smallest debt first. And then you snowball it. And that's going to be very helpful for getting things to be completed. You scheduling time for yourself, put yourself on your schedule, even if it's an hour of lunch, an hour of walking, hour of self-care, an hour of doing yoga, something, put yourself there. Because again, if you don't, you'll be surprised how quickly that gets taken away from you. Generate a list of self-care activities and make a commitment to do them regularly. Practice gratitude. So practicing gratitude can take many forms. It could be just taking that time, 5 minutes out of the day, to just think of everything that went well that day. What are some things you're proud of? What are some things that went well? What are some things that you really enjoyed that day? Who are some people that you connected with or talked to? What made you smile that day? And getting into a regular thought pattern of that can be very helpful, because it also refocuses us to deal better, in order to deal better with our stress, with our anxiety, with our depression. Sometimes writing down what we're thankful for can be very helpful. There's an activity of putting what you're thankful for in a jar. So it might be, something good that happened today. I completed this presentation. I made it through my sessions. I saw another sunset. And putting it in a jar to return back to later. Sometimes it helps to date that date, what you wrote, because then you can go back and say, on October the 10th, I saw a sunset. And that can help remind you, okay, that was special to me because I happen to enjoy sunsets. I feel very connected to watching the sun change into different colors in the sky. And that can be very recentering when you're feeling very stressed, to remember something that you really enjoy that's meaningful for you. Avoiding thought traps or cognitive distortions, as they're also called. So sometimes that might look like unrealistic expectations, personalizations, maximizing things such as something that other people might think of as not as significant. When we maximize it, it becomes very significant. Like when someone handed you change in the store, the way the voice sounds, it might make you think, okay, this person's very mad at me, but that might also be just their normal tone of voice. Minimizing things, like minimizing your own accomplishments. So the things that you've done well, saying, well, that was nothing. That can create a thought trap of looking at your accomplishments as nothing, instead of recognizing that energy and that thought and that hard work that went into it. What are the things that make you special? Minimizing those as not significant. So this is a lovely YouTube about looking at self-care. I don't think we have time for it today, but I'm gonna put it in the chat. And so that's, let's see. See if it's gonna work. Yay. So it's in the chat, and I would recommend watching it. It's really insightful ways of looking at self-care and the importance of that. So I'm gonna also throw this over to Ellen. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Thank you, Demita. It's a great overview and some great tips. And I'm really not going to say anything different from you. I pretty much am reiterating a lot of what you said. I use the mask in the airline analogy as well. Self-care is patient care. If you're not taking care of yourself, you don't have anything to give. You're not going to be as effective and efficient, and you're going to burn out quicker. So you got to take care of yourself first. You got to get that oxygen mask going. I worked with a man in Destin, Florida, but I don't do Qigong for 4 hours every afternoon, but he would go do Qigong and meditate, and I suspect nap as well every afternoon. He only treated people in the morning. So it was an interesting experience, but he was always up and on and ready to go. And you got to do that for yourself. If you're not having the right diet, if you're not getting enough exercise, you're going to be achy, miserable, sluggish, feel bad, and not be able to be as effective as a healer. You're not going to be able to be there for your family. And the whole thing you said about gratitude is just right on. We all have roofs over our heads. We have food to eat. You know, we may have worries, we may have things we're, you know, not quite right in our lives, but there's so much you do have to be thankful for. You've got to find that and really feel it and experience that. And then just deal with the other stuff when it comes. But self-care is patient care. If you're not getting yourself in good shape and having enough chi to give to someone else, you're just not going to be as effective. So I wanted to reiterate that point. And the next slide is the, Demita, if you can go one more. I'm sure there's more we could say there, but this is what I call the pause that refreshes. And we're not always at our computer. I tend to be 3 days a week here, but I'm in the clinic 2 days a week also. And you've got to find, if you can't find that whole hour, you've got to find a few moments to recenter yourself. And, you know, it's not music if there's no pauses between the notes. You've got to have something to refresh yourself, whether it's a long, deliberate rest in the evening or on the weekend, or just you finish with a patient, you've prepped the room. Before you go ask that next patient in, you just stand and breathe 3 times. You know, let's just do that right now. Just 3 conscious breaths. Everything gets a little quieter. Everything gets a little calmer. Everything is a little more centered, and you can go and keep going. You're in traffic, you're stuck at a light. Breathe. Just concentrate on your breath until that light changes. It's a much better strategy than cursing and swearing and getting even more aggravated. So find pauses that refresh you. You have to go to the bathroom, sit there a minute before you get up. Just take a few breaths. You know, find little places throughout the day that you can center yourself and relax. And those are my tips. So I like those little pauses between the notes of the music of my life. And I like the long rests also. So
I absolutely love that. And you know, you're right. Without pauses, you can't make a symphony. It's really important.
Yeah, it's just noise if there's no, even with some of the modern music I don't quite understand, which is like grokking my mother, but you know, if there's no pause, it's not music. So, well, I'd love to open it up for questions or comments. Does anybody have any other tactics, ideas, any other little things that you do? Throw them in the chat. You know, let us know what you're thinking. You know, it's really important that we take care of ourselves, so we have that to give our patients and our families and the world. You know, I believe our heart is our template from heaven for our higher purpose. And if we're acting with our higher purpose, we're giving something to the world. Even if it's one person to one person, one little bit of something, you never know what ripple you're going to have. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Please come in and chat if you want to say something. Let us know. Look at the YouTube that Demita shared. And let us know if you have ideas or strategies, or if you use any of these to make some changes. So thank you all for being members, for being here tonight. Thank you, Demita, for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for letting me come.
Sure. All right. I will post this on a YouTube channel tomorrow, probably. And thank you so much. All right.